everyone to the 16th episode of the Real Emergency Vodcast. We've taken a bit of a hiatus, so we're really glad to be back here with you today. This month happens to be Sudden Cardiac Arrest Awareness Month, and today is World Restart a Heart Day. So it's just the perfect time to talk about a call like the one we're going to see today of a sudden cardiac arrest that was successfully resuscitated. We want to honor the celebration of these days with today's content. Real Emergency, is produced in partnership with Handtevy, ReelDx, and 410 Medical. It's powered by Prodigy EMS. I am Hillary Gates. I'm the Director of Educational Strategy for Prodigy EMS. Remember that all episodes of Real Emergency are available to you for CAPC credit on Prodigy EMS. And for those of you watching live today, and you want to earn your 1 hour of free CE, you can scan a QR code at the end that will get you your continuing education. Make sure you check us out on your favorite podcast platform or on the Real Emergency YouTube channel. And don't forget to follow and like us on Facebook and Twitter. I want to start by introducing you to our resident experts. First, David Spiro is a pediatric emergency physician and professor at University of Arkansas Medical System. He's also the chief medical officer of ReelDx. Peter Handtevy is a pediatric emergency medicine physician, an EMS physician, and the founder of Pediatric Emergency Standards Incorporated. Zach Dunlap is a critical care paramedic and works as a clinical education specialist for 410 Medical. And today we have as special guests, first, Sarah Lamb. Sarah is the paramedic who was taking care of the police officer that you'll see in this video. She's the training officer for Richmond Rescue in Richmond, Vermont. Also joining us is Shad Thomas, who's a licensed clinical social worker and a combat vet who is the manager of clinical mental health at GMR. Also joining is Rhonda Kelly, the executive director of the All Clear Foundation, and she's the national director of health, wellness, and resilience for GMR Life. So if you haven't been here before with us, some tips for watching. We want you to weigh in. The panelists will ask for your feedback. Feel free to unmute your microphone, keep your camera on, and ask us questions or make comments in the chat. And to talk about the call before we start today, we're reviewing a pretty tough scenario. The patient is a first responder. You're going to be watching footage of a Vermont police officer who, while conducting a pursuit, goes into sudden cardiac arrest while he's driving. Sarah and her colleagues, who are mostly volunteer-based from a rural area in Vermont, respond to this officer and save his life. We want to review some of the clinical and operational aspects of the call, but also the significant issues that arise with calls like these where we are responding to our own. Most importantly, the heightened emotion, the post-traumatic stress, the importance of our mental health. And we're going to start today with an introduction to kind of the scenario and what was going on. And I'm going to hand this over to Sarah, and then James will play some of the clips of the call as we get going. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, so we, again, are a volunteer-based EMS, and we're in station and heard a lot of chatter on the police radio, and suddenly heard an update that possibly officer was having a medical emergency, and video kind of picks up from there.
Great. We'll show a couple of clips here, so just bear with us.
So this is our police chief's dash cam. In the top, you can see his speedometer. It ranges plus minus 10 miles an hour. So he could be going 80, he could be going 60.
Yeah, anybody got a pulse rate of above 100 right now, even though we're sitting on Zoom? Yeah, we'll definitely be talking about that. Great. So let's go ahead and move to when he suffers the cardiac arrest. All right. Incredible.
Wow.
Sarah, can you talk through sort of the, we're going to see a clip of you in the cab of the ambulance, but can you kind of talk through what's going on here in your mind as you're thinking about this call, even 5 years after the fact?
My heart rate still goes up every single time watching those clips. And same thing every time he steps on the brakes. So on the way there, we didn't exactly know what the medical emergency was. They just said they thought he was having a medical emergency. And that morning it was a new crew, first time for a number of us running together. So we had actually just run a code drill as a crew for the first time. So on the way back, we were talking, or on the way there, we were talking about, kind of similar things of getting the equipment that we had just gone through, getting that ready.
Right. And I think this is a good time for us to sort of cue up some of the feelings that all of us are experiencing as first responders, knowing we're responding to one of our own. Sarah, you said you were wearing an Apple Watch and you looked at it after. What did it say?
So my heart rate on the way to the call was close to 200. And then the whole way on the drive there. And then as soon as we got on scene, my heart rate did kind of level down to a normal rate. And then it shot back up when we got to the hospital. I was handing off care.
Incredible. Rhonda, let's hear from you about sort of what you're seeing here and some of the things we know about science and the way our bodies respond to stuff like this.
So one of the big areas of focus that we've been having with emergency responders is that our nervous systems aren't under conscious control and are always looking for threats in our environment. And that instinct is exceptionally honed in emergency responders who aren't coming into scenes to look for things they're grateful for or for design ideas or anything like that. They're looking for what went wrong, imagining what could go wrong, and preparing. So a lot of the sympathetic nervous system activation happens, heart rate up, like Sarah talked about, blood pressure, respirations, prefrontal cortex coming offline, emotional centers engaging. And I think that's pretty much what was exemplified there. Shad, did you have anything?
No, just the family that we build around each other in this type of work is a huge protective factor for us normally. Yet when something like this happens and we're getting a call and we know that one of our own is involved, it can really kind of throw a wrench into the whole process, into our planning. It's different. We know that we're showing up to the scene and it's just going to be different. And in the back of our mind, we start playing all sorts of really negative self-talk and tapes, knowing that I'm going to be the one responding to one of our own. I better not screw this up. They're in my hands, and depending on how the outcome of the call could go, the risk to developing some pretty intense traumatic stress or stress injuries is very real.
Thank you, Shad. Zach, as a paramedic who has run a lot of emotional calls, is there a sense here of memory for you of responding to one of your own or another first responder? And what was it like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing is just trying to breathe. I mean, that's the number one thing I teach our people. How many people are training doing scenarios where their heart rate is 160 to 200, right? I mean, it's really, really tough to duplicate that. And so for me, it's always just learning to breathe. I responded to a helicopter crash with 5 dead. The best thing for me, though, was I had about a 30-minute response time. So I had time to think. I had time to really gather myself and my emotions before I got there, where in these scenarios, usually, you've only got a few minutes, the person or the people, and it makes it different. So I think for me, it's always just gone back to training, right? Remember the basics, teach our people the tactical breathing, just like they do in the military. And then that'll help you focus on what you're about to come into.
Yeah, Shad or Rhonda, can you talk about that tactical breathing? Because there are really specific ways that we can slow ourselves down a little bit.
Absolutely. I know we've all heard of box breathing. More recent science coming out of Stanford, Andrew Huberman, if anybody follows him like I do on all the channels. All right, Zach. So what Stanford has found is that never in the history of telling somebody, including ourselves, to calm down, has ever anybody actually calmed down. That if we want to speak to our nervous system, we have to speak in its language. The breathing pattern they recommend is called physiologic sigh. If you are a firefighter, you were probably trained in skip breathing when you're running low on your SCBA and you're trapped. It's a double inhale through the nose, so followed by a slow exhale through the mouth. Research has shown that within 3 to 5 cycles, that actually starts to bring your heart rate back down, your blood pressure back down, help you re-engage your prefrontal cortex. So it can have a really calming effect on the nervous system, helping performance in high stress situations like Zach referred to.
Fabulous.
Hillary.
Go, Peter.
Yeah, this is fantastic information. I mean, I've never heard this before. My heart rate is still up.
Same.
Okay. And for me, and again, I haven't told this story to many people, but not too long ago in Palm Beach County, we were on our way to a call, and we were going through a red light, and the last second I saw the guy coming at 55 miles an hour, and I yelled for him to stop, and luckily it didn't hit my side, or else I wouldn't be here today. But just understanding that it's your own person. Everyone on this call knows what it's like to be flying down the road at 80 miles an hour with the lights and sirens on. And I can't stop to wonder how many times a day this is happening to our personnel. And to hear Rhonda and Shad, come on today, because it's clear, well, maybe it's clear, but the fact that he went into cardiac arrest was a direct result of this adrenaline surge, right?
Of course.
And if it's happening over and over and over again, then I think that there's a big danger here that's happening. It's like these micro traumas. Rhonda or Shad, is that really what's happening on every one of these calls that's happening to these folks?
Absolutely. The fight or flight system wasn't designed to be triggered on and off, on and off, on and off all day, every day. It was meant to be for truly us being eaten by something else. I mean, that's what it's designed to handle. And so, but now we live in this such an environment and do such difficult work that without purposefully doing things to counteract that activity in our life, outside of work, while we're at work, doing simple things like Ron was talking about with the breathing, but even just how we choose to spend our free time, what we do to help us out, to counterbalance this constant activation. You're just running red line the entire time, and eventually it's going to take its toll, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I had just to comment real quickly. I had 2 mentors. One was a paramedic instructor when I was a paramedic, when I was a young lad, and also when I was in my pediatric ER fellowship training program. 2 very important mentors gave me the same advice, which is if you run, when you're in a scene and you do things to actively activate that sympathetic nervous system, you're going to be less effective as a provider. And so there's a lot we've known about, and Huberman and others have talked about it, that there are some simple techniques that we can all use to help better prepare ourselves for and respond to a number of these events, because we are experiencing microtraumas. We are being activated all the time. And I think we need to be doing better as teachers and educators to work with our crews and our teams to give them resources so they can better manage scenes, because we know more now than we did when we were in our early parts of our training.
Nice statement.
I absolutely agree with that. If I can jump in here quick, Hillary, I think culturally and professionally, we do a lot of things that are counter to our own well-being in regards to regulating our nervous system. I think back to the insistence over the course of my career, radios have to be on all the time. You have to be listening to all the tones. We all feel that spike every time we hear a tone go off, thinking that this is keeping us prepared. What it's doing is keeping us activated, depleting our resources. In addition to that, not only it's running the calls, but the replaying of them in our head, whether it's from a place of rumination, shoulda, coulda, woulda. I saw somebody made a comment, so playing Call of Duty isn't a great way to relax. No, our forms of entertainment tend to be very activating for our nervous system. And we have missed that we are causing all of these micro traumas over the course, not only of our work time, but of our personal time. And I love the statement that was made earlier about, every time we consciously activate our nervous system, we have to do something to counter that, to regulate, to bring us back to parasympathetic.
And the one last thing I just want to say, one last thing that's really, really important that overlays all of this is everyone on this call today, even myself as an emergency medicine provider, we are all sleep deprived because of the work that we do. And so overlaying on all this micro trauma, we also have less reserve because we're operating at 3 a.m. or 3 p.m, but we haven't slept well the night before. So while we're not going to talk about that now, I think the lack of sleep and sort of the sleep disruption also, creates a lot of sympathetic surge.
100%.
The adaptive nature of the brain cares about surviving today, period, end of story. So if you're constantly activating your fight or flight system because every day is stressful and you don't do anything to mitigate that or communicate to your brain what's actually going on, your brain's going to wire and you're going to go from having a volume control knob on your fight or flight response that's going to be proportional to a light switch. So you'll find yourself experiencing, subclinical symptoms of things like PTSD where you're emotionally numbing, you're more irritable, and it's because even when you're at home, that light switch is still flickering on and off.
Great. Speaking of more stress, let's watch Sarah and her crew respond. We have a clip. It'll show the cam and the dash cam in the ambulance, and just listen. There's going to be some swearing here. Just alerting you to that. Listen to the things they're saying. Look at their body language, and then we'll have Sarah talk a little bit about that actual response, especially in a rural area. To Zach's point, longer response on a winding country road.
Responding for officer related.
I'm gonna stand by and Barbara Farm.
Get the monitor ready. Have the med box and IO present.
Okay, so you're at that place.
Tell my dispatch from Richmond 81.
She's still in there. They've been updated.
Where is 21?
Nothing other locations.
Radio. Can you confirm, are they saying CPR or AED?
George needed 372, so somebody Toyota Avalon. CPR is they need an AED, no AED on scene yet.
Look, he should be in his car. You can tell the officers there should be one in his car. Oh God, this is like the worst thing I've ever seen. Oh my God. See guys, basically no matter what we transport, this is not a patient to leave behind. Like, it doesn't fit with there's no termination. Pull the fuck over!
Wilson 206, if you can copy, there should be an AED in M511 DQ. Wilson 206, if you can copy, or any unit with M511 and 206, there should be an AED in 511 DQ.
Whoever you can.
Waterbury. Phase 2. 10-4, Middlesex has been advised. Wilson 242, please give me a 20 and speed.
We're on Duxbury Road South. I'll use ahead of me, probably going 60 to 70.
There it goes again, your pulse rate. Sarah, talk to us about those things. You had your hands up, you covered your mouth, you said the F-bomb a couple times. Kudos, I would have done that too. Your crew is heightened, you're doing instructions, and we'll get to the AED part in a minute. So let's focus on the on your feelings in that time.
And on the way there was the unique situation that we actually knew who we were responding to. And being in a rural area, I've definitely responded to people that I know, but usually we don't know that until you get on scene and walk in the house, or if you know the address. So on the way there, like I vividly remember replaying the first time that I met Chief Buck during like Tropical Storm Irene, when our town was completely submerged underwater. So I was just not really present in the moment, but just replaying meeting Chief Buck and going through all of that in my head.
Yeah. Volunteers, especially when you're the only paramedic in town, or you live amongst all of the people that you're going to respond to, are going to experience responding to one of their own, literally responding to someone you know, family members or otherwise. Peter, we're going to transition kind of to talk about using doing a lot of CPR training and making sure that EMS and fire and law enforcement are training together. And Sarah, just because it's an interesting anecdote, you knew there was an AED in the trunk of the police officer's car. Why did you know that?
So we are a heart safe community in Richmond, and that was thanks to the support of Chief Buck agreeing to create a model where police were going to be carrying AEDs and responding to us to anything with CPR in progress. They do not respond to medical emergencies in our system. And so this case happened on a Friday, and that Wednesday, the department was in for their annual CPR training with us. And so I had made everyone in the department, chief included, do their 2 minutes of compressions without a break. And I had also just checked all of their AEDs.
Amazing. And you could see the stress happening on the scene there of the officer trying to get the AED out of the trunk. Couldn't get the trunk open. I'm sure all of that heightened. Peter, in Florida, you've done a ton of work with your jurisdictions and your cities and your towns to get training among all of the different first response organizations. Talk about your successes, what works, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, great. It started with us with MCIs. You know, we do a lot of MCI training. Obviously, the whole Parkland thing was a very big imprint on us. And what we recognize is that when we're doing the MCI trainings, you have PD here, you have the incident command structure from fire here, and there's nobody talking to each other. So we started doing something called MCI Mondays. I'll fast forward that we started to get to know everybody, we became friends, we started to realize, hey, maybe we should be working together. And then we said, PD is always on the scene for cardiac arrest before us, and they're always just saying, come on, get the medics here, get the medics here. And we recognize that maybe we ought to go and train them, not have them go do a little, kind of not so good CPR class, like get it done the high performance CPR way that we do it. And next thing you know, we recognize that we have them in the number one position and we just tap them out. So it is now the recognition that is bystander, the telecommunicator is very important in starting CPR. There's police, the third person there, and then EMS, we're fourth there. So you really have to do what Sarah's done and really get them there. But I wanted to ask Sarah, it's probably been made clear already, but those officers who came by were not from your department, right? Is that's why they had no idea that there was an AED in that car, right? Number one. And then I'm looking at the comments, Hillary, a lot of people are saying, wow, They stopped CPR for so long. And that goes back to the fact of, the training. If they're not conscious and they're not breathing normally, you ought to be doing CPR no matter what.
Yeah, we learned quite a lot from this in terms of our system and how we need to integrate our resources better. So because of this, we created stickers that are on our car, on all of our police cars, on our neighboring fire department vehicles, and it's on the compartment door of every apparatus wherever the AED is actually physically located. And they're reflective stickers that say AED equipped.
So I was gonna say to Sarah's point, which is wonderful, you're doing that. But to everyone on the call today, it's very simple. I'm gonna give you like the one thing you got to do. Go find the trainer for the police department who does the training for CPR for the department. Go take that person out to lunch. Go buy them Dunkin' Donuts. That's where you start, and then say, hey, you know what? How about I come in and you bring the mannequins, you do the high performance stuff, and all of a sudden they're like, okay, so but you have to make that relationship happen. That would be step number one. And then if you're gonna do what Sarah and their team did with stickers, that's just incredible stuff. We haven't done that.
Sarah, talk a little more about the sticker, because I mean, really, it came out of this call, right? That you knew that there was an AED in the trunk, but unless you had see-through, X-ray vision, no one else would have known that. So you went with the sticker. I mean, did you order them?
Yeah, so we ended up making the stickers because the only ones I could find would say like this facility is AED equipped, and they were all like $15 each. So we just ordered a bunch of them so that they would be at cost, and then we could also just sell them to other communities at cost in our area. So there's a lot of it's very cool, and in our county that have fire trucks, AEDs, police cars that all say AED equipped. And I am not trying to sell things on this podcast, but we do have them. They're $2 or $3 each, I think, just at cost for the cost of making them. So I can put my email in the chat, and feel free to reach out if you would like some for your department.
Yeah, I think you just made $500 because we got people already asking. No problem. Yeah. I mean, I don't think anyone signed anything here that said we weren't going to try to save people's lives. It's okay. So we've queued up another part of this where we talk a little more about what happens when everybody gets on scene. And if you've worked in a rural area or a place where there are multiple agencies responding as mutual aid or various things, plus volunteers, you'll note what's happening here, that there are people in varying degrees of uniform and all trying to work together to help Chief Buck. There isn't great footage of the actual resuscitation just because it's coming from the camera of one of the parked police cars, as well as in the back of the ambulance. We're not seeing a lot. So Sarah can narrate some of this as well. So let's go ahead and watch the clips of some of the clinical aspects of the resuscitation. Go ahead, James.
Point to your cutoff there, still southbound on the dirt end side of Duxbury Road. What road did you pass?
They're coming up on, we just passed Camel Pump Road, still southbound.
This is Two Shocks in with his own AED, and we just arrived and are transferring over to ours.
Southbound on River Road right now.
So many people on this call will know the hurdles and the headaches of AEDs and cardiac monitors that don't talk to each other. Sometimes there are cables that don't plug in properly, or you're using two different manufacturers' machines. So that's certainly a headache here. But Sarah, how many shocks total? 10? Okay.
10 with his, 8 with ours.
Got it. And how many different agencies or responders are here? In addition, you had 3 people on your unit, and then who else?
So we had state police, DMV officer, county sheriff, our agency, and with us, we had multiple of our members that were off-duty first responders, and then a neighboring town fire chief happened to be in that town, so he stopped, and then also the state search and rescue coordinator, who's an EMT, he was driving by the scene right before we got there. So there were quite a lot of people.
Yeah. The other thing you might have noticed that's happening here, and again, no judgment, is the rate of compressions is probably a little too fast by most standards. Rhonda and Shad, this has got to be due to the heightened state of everyone responding and knowing each other.
Absolutely. It's really easy as the body's physiologic response gets amplified, that our performance starts to slip, we start to accelerate. And I think it was Zach who made the comment earlier, how often do we train with our heart rate above 140? We train in calm classroom settings for the majority of our practice, and it's a very different situation in the field, especially if we've got all these other compounding factors. Like Sarah said, they knew the officer. It's part of the response community. So it's a tight-knit family, and it's in a rural community where they're typically running on at least acquaintances, if not friends or family members, on a regular basis.
And Hillary, let me just state the obvious here, that obviously when there's so many different people on the scene, it's very, very difficult to do the job right. Just a couple things. When as a medical director, I ride, I try to stay as invisible as I can, because it's a person that causes them stress anyway. When you have other people, who's in charge, if you have people from the same crew running the show, that's fine. When you have all these other people coming in, you see it and I'm sure David will comment on this, in the recess room, in the trauma bay. When you have umpteen people in there, people are afraid to speak, people are afraid to do. Nobody knows who's in charge. So I'm curious, I would love to hear from Sarah and from others, but Sarah, how did you manage the scene, and how did you get rid of the people who really were in the way rather than being helpful?
I think one of the ways that really helped in this situation was because normally we do not immediately transport cardiac arrest. Our system, we typically try to either stay on scene until we reach a point of termination, or we get ROSC and we transport. But because this was such an unsafe situation, there wasn't even any consideration in my head of staying on scene until we even reached, a stable number of shocks or anything. So it was much easier to control the scene just by getting in the ambulance and running, which is not obviously what we want to do on every call.
Yeah, there's something to be said for being in your own sandbox. Somebody says that where I work. But you even said it on the way to the call. Your clinical decision-making changed as soon as you decided, as soon as you realized that this was someone you knew and an officer. We're not staying on scene. This is not something, and we're not going to terminate resuscitation. If this had been a civilian or not on the side of a highway or something like that, that might have been different. So these are all factors we have to really be thinking about. Good. Zach, anything to add in your experience?
Just that this is the framework of EMS in our country. All of us in the big cities,
nice.
We do this every day. We've got all of our fire departments, and we've got it oiled down, right? I mean, this is just like a well-oiled machine with us. But my first part of my career was in the Texas Panhandle, very rural, middle of nowhere. And this is what our EMS is in our country. Everybody coming together, all different backgrounds, and in these type of situations. So I think, being put into this situation that they are, they're doing a phenomenal job to this point. And I think I probably would have got him into the ambulance as soon as possible as well.
Yeah. Great.
Last thing, Hillary, there are people are probably thinking, hey, how come they didn't use double sequential? I mean, this is years ago, right. But I'm sure many people on this call, and I'm curious how many people are doing it, but how many people would actually do a vector change, right? AP, or just go ahead and do double sequential defibrillation, which now we know can double survival. So just a
Good.
comment.
Yeah. Peter, I'm going to kick it over to you again for what happens next with this call, which is something we didn't see, we didn't play the clip of, but Sarah can tell you that earlier when the officers were giving CPR to Chief Buck, he moved a little bit. He had his arms kind of moving and he seemed to be responding a little bit, maybe taking some breaths. And there is this phenomenon called CPR-induced consciousness. You'll see it abbreviated as CPR-IC. It's much more common now with mechanical CPR devices that provide such high quality CPR. And Peter's going to walk us through a little bit about some of the studies that have been done, but we also want to hear about your experience with it. Obviously, Sarah's experience and Zach's, and maybe a little bit of clinical information. Sarah, what was it like when you watched him move and talk?
It was very disconcerting. So during transport, he was definitively in VFib but was opening his eyes, following motor commands to squeeze our hands, open his eyes, look around. So it was very disconcerting. There was a time earlier in transport where some people on the crew were like, oh, he just moved, stopped, and, stopped CPR. I could see he was still in BFib. So it's like, no, you can't be alive in BFib. So that was very disconcerting. But even without mechanical CPR, since we've started really just focusing on high quality CPR, we've seen this with multiple cases.
Great. Peter, over to you.
Right, and exactly what Sarah said is exactly why this information is very important. So it turns out that they've done some surveys. 65% of EMS personnel are aware of it. You can see that there's still a large portion who don't even know what it is. The initial rhythm, obviously, the biggest proportion is going to be VFib, and I'm sure that was the thing in this case here. What would you do? So again, this is another survey that was done. Most people, if not all people, at some point will stop CPR. There's a number of videos you can find on the internet. You can see it here on the videos here. There's patient restraint. There's ignoring the patient actions, don't know what to do. At the end of the day, you have to do something, but there's a problem. And the problem is that people don't know about it, and then it's not in the protocol, and therefore the question is what to do. So here is the question. Does anyone know what to do? Are there guidelines? What does ILCOR say? What does the AHA say? So there's lots of data. This is a good one. It's a scoping review of guidelines, 23 guidelines they looked at across the entire country. And they're all over the place, right? Let me show you. 23 protocols were evaluated. 11 of 23 had ketamine. 9 of 23 had fentanyl. 14 of 23 had midazolam. And the dosing was all over the place. The routes were all over the place. The max doses were all over the place. Secondly, was there single or multi-drug management? 6 of the 23 guidelines had single drug. 15 had multi-dose combinations, fentanyl, Versed. Some even had a paralytic in there, which we'll talk about in a minute. Only 12 of 23 of these protocols even explained how this presents. And I can tell you, I'll show you my protocol in a minute. We don't tell you how it presents. We may have to make a slight revision. But here's what happens. They're either pushing with a device, they're biting down on the tube, they're grabbing the rescuer. A lot of the times they're moving their arms. You could see here that there's a lot of ways that CPR-induced consciousness exhibits itself. What does ILCOR say? So in 2021, they actually came out and they said, hey, let's take a look at this thing called consciousness during CPR. And they wanted to basically see whether or not a complete review was warranted, whether there was enough data to actually review. And what they did was they came out with some treatment recommendations, but they said that there's insufficient evidence. Sorry for the noise in the background. There's insufficient evidence that you should consider using sedative or analgesic drugs. Neuromuscular blocking drugs should not be given to conscious patients because in the past they've been doing that. And they basically said that the optimal drug regimen is uncertain. So it's basically a bunch of, we don't really know, but you should use things in small doses, and you should never give folks just a paralytic because that's not what they need. So I actually thought I had my protocol up here, but in my protocol, it's we do 200 of ketamine in a 50 cc bag, and we run it wide open. That's what our protocol says. It'll be in the Dropbox folder. Teach your personnel about it, put it in your protocol, make a decision on what sedative you're going to use, and then follow your data after that. I'll stop there. I'd love to hear some feedback.
Yeah. Sarah, tell us about what, now that it's been a few years since this, have you seen it again, and or what are you doing differently, or how are you training differently, knowing that this could happen?
So we've seen it several times. We had a woman who yelled when we defibrillated her, and another person who kept on reaching into his pocket. And once we got Ross, he said he needed to get his keys to his wife because how else could she get to the hospital? So we've been seeing it a bunch. And the biggest thing that we've, I think, really changed is that Now, not, we're really making sure we're educating our EMS providers, but when we're teaching bystanders, fire department, law enforcement, everyone CPR, the biggest thing that we're teaching is that if somebody moves, makes noise, anything while you're doing compressions, it's okay to stop. But if they stop, you immediately start again. And it's just educating patients of why the fact that you are now perfusing their brain, you've taken over for their heart, and making sure that people understand why it's happening. It also, I think, makes people less concerned to do compressions on somebody who is moving or making noise.
Wonderful. Zach, your thoughts or experiences that you've had?
No, literally just had this happen like 3 times in the last month here at my service. And it, exact same thing. Provider stopped CPR, still in VFib. As soon as he started CPR again, she starts waking up, trying to grab at him. So I think, exactly what Dr. Handtevy just went through is the correct thing. My caution would be making sure that you're not giving too much of something. Make sure that it's that shock dose type ketamine, low dose Versed. Remember, these patients are still very sick. They're going to be catecholamine depleted. And so when we do get ROSC, we're going to be fighting against ourselves if we just dumped a whole bunch of sedatives in them. So I would just caution to give, smaller amounts, but that, I think that's really your only option in these scenarios. I always think of the Dumb and Dumber scene, out with the bad or in with the good, whenever he's awake and talking with these.
Perfect. Great. Peter put his CPRIC folder up there, everyone in the chat. So if you want some of those documents, they're available for you. Thank you, Peter. We're going to move now to a bit of footage of what we just described. Again, it's very hard to see because of the camera being in the cab of the ambulance. So James will show a little bit of that, as well as when ROSC was achieved, and then we'll talk through that as we come close to the end of the call today.
Yeah. What? Yeah, Brad. I got you, okay?
He is still in VFib.
Brad, does he have a pulse?
You can just see one of our crew members doing CPR in the walkthrough.
Those folks in the audience who have seen some of this, go ahead and weigh in on the chat with what you've done when you see it. But it does need to be known more about what's happening when this is going on, and how to respond and not interrupt what's going on. Peter, David?
No, I think you said it just right. You just got to make sure that you actually continue CPR, but without sedating the patient, Hillary, in all honesty, I think most people are just going to continue to check and check and check. And the coronary perfusion pressure, the cerebral perfusion pressure is just going back down to 0 each time you do that. So I think that it's an important thing to do.
Yeah.
And all I would say is kudos, because it's good situational awareness. Obviously, she was thinking through things, not as limbic as some of us might be with a pretty intense situation. And kudos to the team.
Yeah, agree. I like that Peter brought up coronary perfusion pressure, because another really important aspect of the call here is a debrief or a hot wash, or whatever you call it, that we're going to review the call after it's over, talk about what went well, what we could have done better. And Sarah, that's part of your practice. So if you can talk through kind of how you did that with this call, and then what your procedures are now for making sure that there are debriefs as well as data.
So we use the Zoll monitors and have the feedback pads. So with codes, we'll pull the data after any cardiac arrest, and then we can review it with the crew. And so we can look at our compression fraction, our metrics on rate and depth. And as Hillary noted pretty early on, the biggest thing I think that we were off on this case was we were definitely averaging a little bit high on our rate, but it was, we're able to see that our compression fraction was still above 90%, even with the move and transport.
Great. And Sarah mentioned using Zoll, but most of the monitors have the ability to download data that can be a quick printout and giving to your crew, so that giving this information to your crew so that you can go through some of the things that you can improve for next time. And you'll see lots of fire departments and EMS agencies who have done this, and it's become kind of a contest to see who can give a patient the best high performance CPR, and those who might have been reluctant in the past to be excited about a cardiac arrest call are now making a huge difference and raising their survival rates to way above 10%. So that's pretty exciting.
Hillary, I wanted to make a comment because there's some people in the chat here, and I would love to get Rhonda's take on this, which is that if you're BLS and you don't have access to medications, what do, right? Your only options are to restrain the patient and just to continue doing CPR. It turns out that has a major negative impact on the healthcare provider later on, big time. And people have PTSD, they lose sleep, especially if the patient doesn't have a good outcome. So I'd love to hear Rhonda and others' comments here on what needs to be done for, like, after a patient like this. I think we should treat it very seriously for the crew.
Absolutely. And like so many of the things you say, you hit on some incredibly valuable points here. And I think particularly for the volunteer community, where there can be low frequency but very high acuity calls that have a greater personal impact than they do in larger community areas. I think that culturally, we've always held ourselves to high personal standards, and oftentimes we misinterpret that as we should feel shame and we should be silent if we don't understand what happened or if we feel like we didn't hit the mark. I think really encouraging personnel as part of the hot wash that you mentioned, Hillary, to talk about how do you feel, what are you thinking. So many times we're beating ourselves up because we don't understand some other things that happened on the call. We're berating ourselves and telling ourselves that it's us holding ourselves accountable when it's not. It's shame, which is detrimental. Another thing that I see in the volunteer communities in particular is we know that as humans, we're not fully cognitively developed until we're around 25, yet volunteer agencies start as young as 13, and we're throwing kids essentially into these high acuity scenes, oftentimes when they don't have parents or family members who understand that this isn't just an extracurricular activity, that they need some additional support. They're experiencing things that might be a little bit beyond their current developmental level. That can be addressed with the appropriate support from the crew, from medical partners, from others, and that can mitigate some of the negative effects of these calls. And really, last thing I'll say, and then I'd love to hear Shad's thoughts on this, are really approaching calls with a mindset of curiosity rather than judgmentalism, and knowing that everybody there was intending to do the right thing in their framework, and using that as an opportunity to create that cohesiveness, that bond interagency wise among our own crews with the community is just a prime opportunity to help us continue our improvement in our care delivery in the future without paying a huge personal price.
Both Peter and Rhonda hit it on the head, and there is a lot to be said about helping people shift their perspective on an event. Unlike any other animal that exists, we have that capacity, we have that ability to step back and view a situation and experience through a different lens that allows us a little bit more cognitive flexibility to see it in a hopefully more positive, if not just less crappy way. And that protects us downline from experiencing reoccurring things like intrusive thoughts, problems with sleep. And one thing important for supervisors and managers to understand, symptoms of PTSD or a just stress injury may not show up right now. Everybody experiences it very differently. It could be something that doesn't actually really hit them for 6 months when they're in another call. And so helping people understand that this is the range of what you may experience on a call like this. It's important to have support and be able to talk about it, but you may not feel anything right now, and that's okay. And you may feel something later, and that's okay. But just helping people understand that it's not some sort of moral failing or weakness, but it's their brain doing exactly what it's designed to do. And if it starts becoming, intrusive into parts of your life, then you need to get really serious about it before it gets worse.
Wonderful.
One thing I just want to mention, Hillary, is about the debrief. When we were initially trained many decades ago about debriefing, it's still very formalized, and at our institution, we go through things after a code when a child comes in, because I'm a peds ER doc. And by the way, most children, when they come in with CPR in progress, they die. That's just the nature of peds EM. Peter can relate to that. But I have found over time, when I've been leading debriefs, that there are two pieces to it. This is very important for all the educators to listen to. There are really two things that I think about accomplishing in the debrief. One is giving everyone an opportunity to talk about what actually happened, and it is potentially an opportunity to improve what had happened, because it just happened, right? From a whatever may or may not have gone well. And I often try to stay on the positive. But as time has gone on, those debriefing episodes and times afterwards are really the time to check in on your team members, to see how they are doing after this resuscitation. And you will know how they talk about it. And it's an opportunity for you as a team leader to then know who may be having a trouble after one of these things, and to follow up. So I see the debriefing as an opportunity, yes, to improve performance, but I actually think it's more important to check in on the psychological well-being of your team members as part of that debriefing episode. Peter, what are your thoughts at this time? Do you agree?
I was gonna say I agree, especially if it's one of your own. So my fire chief, may he rest in peace, passed away in Davie, Florida. And I'll never forget, we were all at the hospital. The crews who worked him did an amazing job working him, but we had to check in with them to see how they were doing, because it was the chief, right? And so, just to Sarah's point and to this whole conversation, what you just said, David, is kind of it's exponential when it's one of our own, and I think that's a huge point here. But I do agree with you.
I agree with both those wholeheartedly. And it really, the factor that best determines whether we'll experience a career of success or a career of distress is how well we take care of our own in the aftermath, and how well we normalize the human reactions to some pretty abnormal exposures. And I think that's just an amazing way for us to take better care of our own.
Well said. And to that point, let's end with the great news here. And we have a photo of what happened here at the end that James can put up. Sarah, talk about what this meant to you, and kind of what kinds of things you did here. You have a challenge coin story and some other things, but wrap this up for us. Bring it home.
Yeah. So kind of the wrap up to the case was, after 30 minutes of CPR, we got ROSC, and in this case happened on a Friday. By Sunday, Chief Buck was out of the ICU, and he went home on Tuesday with an AICD, internal defibrillator, and had absolutely no deficits, and had to be strongly convinced not to return to work right away. So that was a pretty amazing outcome, especially, him having such a strong connection to our department. And after this case, we also made some challenge coins that are ROSC. So they're given any time that we get ROSC on a case, whether or not overall there's neurological survival, but we just realized how important it was to also celebrate the small victories. And getting ROSC is something that when I started, we were told we're never going to get. We're in a rural area. No one's going to survive from cardiac arrest. You're never going to get a pulse back. So the challenge coins, we give them to all of our crew members, bystanders, fire department, police officers, dispatchers, anyone involved. And it's been very rewarding. We've also given them to several patients now.
And you made the challenge coin a little more user-friendly and useful. Tell us what you did.
Yes, so they're bottle openers. I didn't want to just do coins that would kind of be in like a case on somebody's shelf and get dusty. So we decided to do bottle openers in the hopes that, you know, someone might use it in public and then that could spark a conversation and get somebody else interested in learning CPR.
Amazing. Peter, what do you do in your agencies for recognizing events like this? Because it is a huge part of people's healing for sure.
Yeah, this is great. I love the bottle opener idea. What we decided to do was we have a bar that goes, you know, right, you know, so everyone can see it. And basically, you have to have a CPC 1 or 2. And if you get a number,
explain CPC 1 and 2.
Okay, right. So if your cerebral performance score is favorable, meaning it's a number 1 or number 2, meaning that you can still go play golf and play soccer, etc. That you're not someone in a vegetative state. That you actually we come to the department. The chiefs come. Everyone comes. The patient comes most of the time, and we actually will present the entire crew with the bar, but it has a number on it. And then if you get another one, we just flip out the bar to number 2 and number 3. And I can tell you, and I'm happy to share, I can put it in the chat here in a minute, or I'll put it in the folder, like who we buy it from, whatever, it's just another ordering thing. But if you honor the folks, it becomes something that they really care about, they really want to do it because they know they can do it. So I would make sure everyone does something like Sarah does, like we do. I'm happy to share that in my folder here in a minute.
Great.
Zach, I just want to also, Peter, that's awesome. And, you know, giving positive reinforcement is such a powerful tool for the crew and things of this nature. And I just really want to thank Sarah for coming on. And, you know, anytime you review video, it's imperfect. You know, that's what we've learned at ReelDx. And, you know, being vulnerable and being open to sharing the story is just incredible. And I think that I've learned so much from spending this time here today, as I have with all the episodes, and really want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being open and sharing your story today.
I definitely want to give Sarah the last word. Thank you, David. Sarah, you've been working on this case now in your head for the last 5 years after you actually worked the case itself. What have you learned, and what are some of your takeaways and epiphanies? And you're doing it again today for us, and we thank you. Teach us some more things.
I think, you know, had a lot of both like medical and system epiphanies, as well as just as a provider. But I think just really taking time to stop and kind of look around at our system and seeing where we had a lot of gaps, and the fact that we didn't have an easy way to communicate directly with the state police, which was then, you know, having to use our dispatcher as a relay. So we also had a hot wash after that and put all the departments in the same room, and we talked about a lot of those logistical things, and that has made a lot of improvements in our system. And then and our state police don't routinely respond to medical emergencies, but they're our primary law enforcement in most of the towns that we cover. Richmond is the only one that does have a dedicated police department. So we also started sending thank you letters to the barracks commander for any officer that comes out. And even if they just stop traffic or just help to bring a bag inside, we sent them a thank you letter. And we've also been getting a lot more response from state police coming by when they see that we are going out to a cardiac arrest. So that's been a really big, rewarding change over time.
Those are fabulous. If your agency does reunions or reaches out to survivors or whatever, one thing that gets left behind often is when the patient doesn't survive, which is most of the time, the bystanders are often forgotten about. And there's a great amount of work being done by a man named Paul Snobelin, who is a paramedic in Canada, to some of the work where he's trying to take care of and recognize those bystanders who helped, but whose patient didn't survive, which we know is more common than not. So just something to be aware of.
Hillary, I wanted to add one more thing in there, which is that someone asked me about midazolam versus ketamine. It turns out when they looked at these couple of case reports that have been coming out, that the patients in the midazolam group didn't do as well as far as neurointact survival. And that could be because of the fact that midazolam is dropping your pressure, decreasing cerebral perfusion, et cetera. So there's not enough data to know anything as to what to use yet. So it's kind of more of a pick something. But ketamine also, remember, causes coronary vasospasm. So we have to be careful about that as well. So just to end on the fact that this is a great topic because there's still so much to learn about it. And I'm so glad that we got to hear from Sarah today, and great to be a part of this. Thank you all.
Great. And we have a question from Tom. Tom, you can unmute yourself, or you can type a question in the chat. Go ahead.
All I wanted to say was, we're like Sarah. I belong to a small rural department, and what we do to try and increase survival of any kind in our district is about once a quarter we offer a community CPR class to anybody and everybody, no charge. We will train everybody in basic hands-on CPR, and we tell them at the beginning of the class, we do this. It's selfish for us because as first responders and volunteers, we may not be there for 5 to 7 minutes, and we want this person, whoever they are, to have the best chance of survival.
I love how you frame that. Thank you, Tom, for sharing. Really appreciate it.
A really big thanks to Rhonda and Shad. I learned so much from you guys in this 1 hour. That was fantastic. And I'm gonna start breathing like that a lot more often during the day.
Maybe not all the time. We need you to be hyper sometimes, Peter. Yeah.
Oh, trust me, you got me there. I'm good there. Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. Great work. We should all emulate your clinical excellence, your operational excellence, and your willingness to train all of us in these incredible scenarios, and keep up the great work. And I hope we can work together again. Thank you for being here, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Taking time out of your day. We appreciate you guys. Stay safe out there, please.